Hello, and welcome to the Brexit Central podcast. I'm Darren Grimes, and on this episode, we'll be analysing the Article 50 debate that took place in the House of Lords this week, discussing the probability of parliamentary ping-pong between the Commons and the Lords, the likelihood of Theresa May's 137 words long Article 50 bill going back to the Commons with amendments attached to it, and whether or not the end of March deadline is still possible with such fierce opposition from defiant Remain-backing peers in the second chamber. Joining me to talk all things House of Lords is Lord Callanan and Jonathan Isserby. Lord Callanan has been a Conservative peer since 2014, having served as MEP for North East England between 1999 and 2014, including stints as leader of the Conservative MEPs and chairman of the European Conservatives and Reformists. And Jonathan Isserby is the editor of Brexit Central. Hello to both of you.
Hello.
Now, Lord Callanan, as a former MEP who voted to leave the EU, passionate Brexiteer, did your experience of the EU and its institutions make you more sceptical of the EU?
It did, yeah. I mean, I was first elected to the European Parliament in 1999, and I went with relatively sort of positive hopes, but increasingly over my time in the European Parliament, I became more disillusioned with the EU project, which is not to say that everything about it is bad. There are some good things that the EU did. I like the promotion of democracy in Eastern Europe. They were a sort of beacon of democratic development for many of those countries. And that was good, but the increasingly authoritarian nature of the project, the ever-increasing cost, the bureaucracy, etc., drove me to advocate for vote leave in the end.
And you sat through most of that debate in the chamber.
I did.
Were there any speeches that you found particularly powerful?
Apart from his own, obviously.
Well, naturally.
I particularly enjoyed my own speeches. I thought, obviously, Baroness Evans opening the debate for the government. I still find it incredible to see government ministers advocating what many of us have been saying for years.
This House passed a bill to deliver a referendum without placing conditions on the result. On the 23rd of June 2016, the British people delivered their verdict. My Lords, this bill is not about revisiting that debate. This bill responds to the judgment of the Supreme Court that an Act of Parliament is required to authorise ministers to give notice of the decision of the UK to withdraw from the European Union.
William Hague, as always, was particularly good.
I voted to remain in the European Union. But I support this bill because I believe the referendum was decisive. It was decisive because there was such a high participation. More people voted to leave the European Union than have ever voted for any British government in history. It was decisive because so many parts of the UK, although not all of them, voted that way. It was decisive because people were promised a referendum in the manifesto of the governing party of the country, and that it would be decisive. And I believe, my Lords, that attempts to refight that referendum, which have begun a little in the last few days, are a great error.
And from a mischievous point of view, I really enjoyed Michael Forsyth taking apart the Liberal Democrats.
This brings me to the Liberal Democrats. They are opposed. They are opposed to the composition of this House, arguing it lacks democratic legitimacy. Despite being reduced to a rump of 9 members in the House of Commons, more than 100 of them have landed here like beached whales noisily swimming against the democratic tide. Their hapless leader, Tim Farron, was almost alone, it seems, in welcoming Tony Blair's ill-judged and embarrassing rallying cry on Friday.
What about on I think there are also some quite powerful speeches from people who were of a Remain disposition, weren't there? Someone like Bruce Groscott, the former Labour leader of the House of Lords, basically saying that, you know, it's not advisory when his team loses a football match, you just got to accept the result.
I very much doubt that if Remain had won the argument and the government had then decided that we were going to leave the European Union anyway, there would not have been many Remainers saying, well, fair enough, it was only advisory. If you play the game, You accept the result. When I watch Stoke City at the weekend, I accept the rules and the result. Though I have to admit, there have been many occasions when I would have loved to have been able to say that the goals against us were only advisory.
Yes, no, there were a number of, there was a lot of people who were passionate Remainers who are Democrats and just accepted the results and said we should get on with it. To look at it simplistically, the country voted to leave the EU. The only legal way of leaving the EU is triggering Article 50. Ergo, we should pass Article 50. That's there are many complications built into it, particularly from a lot of sort of egregious Liberal Democrats. But that's a simplistic boiling down of the issues.
No, I think I'd say Lord Lang made a very good point during his speech when he said very often the Lords complain that the Commons sends very long bills to the House of Commons which haven't been properly scrutinised in the House of Commons, whereas this is the exact opposite. It's a very short bill which has had massive scrutiny from the House of Commons, and that's frankly every reason for the House of Lords to say, okay, this is a sensible piece of legislation. The House of Commons has sent it through unamended, and frankly they should do the same.
We in the Constitution Committee sometimes complain on your Lordship's behalf about long bills inadequately scrutinised in another place, but that can hardly apply in this case. Indeed, the very brevity of the bill underlines its singleness of purpose, and that is its strength, which we should not seek to undermine. It is concerned simply with the timing of the negotiations, when they start and when they finish, no more.
Lord Bridges made the point in his closing speech that there were 1,000 words spoken in the debate for every word in the actual bill.
What do you say to those people who now look at the Lords and feel as though they're, trying to block the will of the people and are completely out of touch with their concerns, with what they want to happen? Do you think that there is a sort of ammunition for Lords reform or what have you if this bill does have amendments added to it?
I think that the Lords, seeking to delay the implementation of Brexit or indeed constraining the government's negotiating mandate looks very bad to most of the outside population. The most bizarre thing, talking to friends of mine who are peripherally interested, but obviously know that I'm involved in politics. Yeah. Their overwhelming reaction to me is, "What are you lot messing around about? Why haven't you got on with it yet? 6 months ago we voted to leave. Why haven't you done it?" Obviously we all know that there are complications and legal issues, etc. But I think that's the overwhelming view of most members of the public. They can't understand all of the messing around in Parliament. Think we should just got on with it months ago. They have made a decision. It's up to us to then implement it. And I think that refreshing clarity of purpose, I think, is a good signal to us to not overcomplicated issues. We voted to leave. We should get on with it.
Do you think that's reflected in the Lords, or do you think there is an overwhelming consensus that amendments should be added? And if so, do you think any of them will pass?
I think it's almost certain that some amendments will pass. The amendment unilaterally guaranteeing the rights of EU citizens will probably pass. The amendment on a meaningful final vote, as it's called, will probably pass. And there's an increasing head of steam building up behind amendments for a second referendum, which, in my view, would be outrageous, particularly. Yeah. But the Liberal Democrats have no shame. They're forgetting the second part of their name in terms of Democrat, and they are intent in causing any kind of trouble they can on this bill.
But see, I've wondered whether those amendments are necessarily in order, because this bill is about giving the government the power to trigger Article 50. It's not about very specific issues like the reciprocal rights for EU citizens, which the government has been very clear on. It wants to grant. It's waiting for the European Union negotiators to agree to that. But it sits with me very oddly, the notion of trying to amend this very narrow bill along those lines.
Well, I'm in no sense an expert on Lord's procedure. I'm a relatively newcomer, only been here for 3 years. But the powers that be tell me that the amendments are in order, though my sympathies are certainly with you, Jonathan, that it would seem to me to be ridiculous. These are attempting to influence the negotiation rather than just authorising the negotiation, which is what the bill is all about, and in an unhelpful way. They all stand up and say, well, of course we respect the result of the referendum, but, and then there's a whole series of buts come onto this, and I think we all know that really they don't respect the result of the referendum. They're seeking to either delay it in some cases or defy the implementation of it completely in other cases.
Now, going back to the Lib Dems, Lord Leicester said that the White Paper contains statements worthy of Dr. Pangloss. He was saying it's far too optimistic and rosy and all of the rest of it. But in your piece for Brexit Central, you said you already feel that the Prime Minister's given away, more than enough of her position and where we're at in the UK. Can you just clarify that, why you believe that, as someone who knows the EU, and whether or not you think these amendments will actually weaken the Prime Minister's negotiating hand?
Yeah, of course they will. I mean, this is going to be a very hard-headed, long, complicated negotiation with a group of people who are very experienced at doing these kind of long, drawn-out battles. If we think about it, political operations on the continent are all proportional representation. They're used to not having a clear outcome to elections. Elections are often followed by weeks or even months of detailed thrashing out of negotiations and lines and arguing about semantics and words, etc. So they're very good at it. And the key thing about negotiations, and I did many of them, or our so-called trialogues in the European Parliament against the Council and the Commission, is that the more that you can know about your opponent's position, the more powerful you are. The Parliament was always weak in these negotiations in that the Council could very easily see which amendments we had a lot of support behind and which amendments only had very weak support, some main parliamentary groupings against. And they knew that there was very little chance of us being able to sustain those amendments in the negotiations. Conversely, of course, we knew very little about what the Council's position was because they met in secret. Sometimes individual member states would leak it, but in general, we didn't know where they were strong, where they were prepared to give ground, etc. And that really does give you a much more a powerful lead in negotiations if you know what your opponent's bottom line is.
Will there be many Conservative peers that go against the government on this?
There are one or two who've indicated that they will. Disgracefully, Baroness Altman indicated that she would, and Patience Wheatcroft also indicated. But the numbers are very small.
Right. And a question to both
Lord
of you.
Bowness, I believe, I'm told from newspapers this morning, has signed one of the Liberal Democrat amendments.
Question to both of you. I think Brexit Central readers will be especially interested in how much this affects the Prime Minister's deadline of end of March to invoke Article 50. Do you think that that's still viable? Do you think that's still possible? And how long will the ping-pong process, if those amendments get added to the bill, how long will that take?
Certainly for what I'm hearing, I think that Martin is right. The House of Lords may pass 2 or 3 of these amendments to make a point. It then gets sent back to the Commons. The Commons will then vote those down, not least because most of those issues were dealt with in amendments that the Commons has already rejected. So we know where the Commons stands on those. Lords say the Commons think again. Commons says, no, we don't. Goes back to the Lords. And my instinct is, and I'm getting the feeling that at that juncture, the House of Lords will say, well, we made our point, but actually now is the time that we do have to accept the will of the people and indeed the will of the elected House. Do you not think?
I would agree with that, yes. I think one round of ping-pong. In other words, the Lords will pass these amendments, which effectively says think again. The Commons says, OK, we've thought again, and we maintain the same position. I think most people will then think we've fulfilled our constitutional duty. We will ask the Commons to think again. They are the elected chamber. They should get their way. But there will be a hard core. I mean, there's 100 Liberal Democrats for a start, plus some crossbenchers. All the Foreign Office establishment are well represented in the crossbenchers. Plus a few Labour rebels on their backbenchers who just want to vote against Article 50 at any cost.
Yeah.
And so, whether I don't think that'll be a majority. I mean, I think that there will be enough from all the other sides to defeat that. But I wouldn't completely rule out the possibility that certain hardliners might want to continue ping pong.
But you're still confident, though. You're both confident that end of March is still possible.
Yeah, easily. Yeah. We should easily make that.
I think if necessary, the government would have a marathon sitting all day, all night, ping pong.
I mean, they can do ping pong one day after the other. I mean, we can do it very quickly. We can make the Commons and the Lords sit consecutively to do it. So I'm sure the government will get their way,
Perfect.
as they should.
And that brings us to the end of this episode of the Brexit Central podcast. You can make sure you get all of the latest podcasts by subscribing to Brexit Central on iTunes or SoundCloud. You can also sign up to our daily Brexit briefing at brexitcentral.com, providing comment, news and analysis with a positive and optimistic vision of Britain after Brexit.